Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this presentation. I'm Jim Van Epps, the chair of the Savannah Council on World Affairs, and host for this evening's presentation by Ambassador Lawrence R. Silverman entitled, What U.S. Embassies Do for America? A great topic, one that we have not approached, so it's certain to be fascinating. So as I was saying, the ambassador speaks from an operational standpoint, as you will hear from his experience. As we begin, I'd like to recall our president's remark that we remember our good friend and longtime council member David Stockwell, who passed away on November 22nd. Thank you to the many council members, as Chip mentioned, who have contributed to our council and its scholarship in David's honor. We miss him. If you were with us in our just concluded annual meeting, you'll recall my remarks that we're holding this meeting in a virtual fashion due to the board's informed consideration for the COVID situation in Chatham County. We will return to live presentations just as soon as the pandemic allows. And so this evening, I'd like to start first by acknowledging our sponsors for this evening's presentation. First, as you see on the screen, Kreitz Auto Group is a continuing platinum sponsor of the Savannah Council for 2021 and 22. Kreitz is our exclusive dealer for Buick, GMC, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Sprinter vans, and we appreciate their continuing support of our programs. Next, Reach the World, bringing the world into classrooms. For over 20 years, Reach the World has harnessed the power of virtual exchange, inspiring students to be curious, confident, and compassionate global students. For the 2020 and 21 school year, the organization offered free and paid opportunities for teachers, students, and their families to connect with travelers exploring the globe in real time. Thank you, Reach the World. And third, the World Affairs Council of America, of which the Savannah Council is a member, is an independent, nonpartisan organization dedicated to engaging the public and leading global voices to better understand the world, America's international role, and the policy choices that impact our daily lives and our future. Thank you, World Affairs Council of America. And now to our speaker, Ambassador Lawrence R. Silverman, who recently moved to Savannah and joined our council, is a retired member of the Senior Foreign Service. His last posting in a 35-year U.S. State Department career was as the U.S. Ambassador to Kuwait until October 2019. Prior to his ambassadorship, he was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, responsible for Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, and Palestinian affairs. That's a full package. But his career is long and distinguished by responsibilities for affairs in other positions, where he was responsible for affairs in the Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, Slovakia, Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus. He began his career in South Africa and Namibia. He now advises U.S. institutions and companies regarding their interests in the Middle East. We have much to learn from him, and I look forward to it. And to his topic. Every day, U.S. embassies around the world are working hard to advance U.S. national interests and enhance the security and prosperity of the American people. You just don't hear much about it publicly. For example, they strive to increase international cooperation to counter terrorism, grow security and military cooperation with our allies, and assist Americans abroad in need. The list of their efforts is much longer, and I urge you to read about them in the announcement for this program. Now, following his presentation, Ambassador Silverman will take questions from our members via the chat function on your computer or iPad. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Silverman. We're glad to have you with us, even in this virtual fashion. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's really a great pleasure to be with all of you this evening. I'm sorry that it's virtual. I want to say also a shout out and thanks and appreciation to the corporate sponsors that have supported the council over the years. I'm very pleased to be a new member of the council. And I look forward to meeting all of you in person when circumstances allow, of course. As mentioned by Jim, my wife Vicki and I are new transplants to Savannah, and we're very happy to be here. I do also want to say happy anniversary to Jose and his wife. You said it's their anniversary, so happy anniversary, Jose. I hope that this will be a continuing dialogue, not a one-off presentation. I would be, and specifically, I'd be happy to discuss careers in international affairs with you and those of you, those whom you mentor. And if I had one message for all of you this evening, ladies and gentlemen, it is that America's foreign policy is not a spectator sport for the American public. I realize that you might not be as engaged on foreign policy issues as you would or as you are on domestic policy issues, and probably rightly so. But if you want, you're willing, I encourage you to follow foreign policy issues, to educate yourselves, to speak and write about those issues, to engage your elected representatives. On certain issues, particularly humanitarian ones, you may be able to contribute directly. Ladies and gentlemen, U.S. foreign policy, U.S. foreign relations matter to your life, and not only in a time of a virulent pandemic, but every day. One overarching point that colors my remarks as I go along here, you'll notice is I am a realist, not an idealist. I think I'm the most realistic person I know about what we can do as the United States overseas and what we cannot do, and what we can expect of others and what we cannot expect of others. You may not believe this, but just about every day of my almost 35-year career with the U.S. Department of State, I asked myself what I was doing for the interest of the U.S. and the interest of the U.S. taxpayer. And if you don't believe me, I can give you the names of some colleagues with whom I worked and how I discussed with them our responsibilities to serve U.S. interests and help U.S. citizens abroad and at home. I'm a taxpayer. Taxpayers should get their money's worth from the Department of State budget and from every government department. I always asked myself whether we were earning our keep. You may have heard the expression, those of you who follow U.S. foreign affairs, we talk about the United Kingdom desk, the China desk, the France desk at the State Department to describe different offices at as what we call Foggy Bottom. Those offices focus on our relationships with those particular countries. So for example, I used to work on the Turkey desk, on the Ukraine desk, on the Israel desk, among several others. But as Madeleine Albright used to say, there also is an America desk. And all of us in the State Department, whether we're posted in Washington or abroad, work on that desk. We look out for America's interests abroad. Most of you probably have never needed to contact the U.S. Embassy or sought to. Hopefully, we did not have to assist you as you faced detention or incarceration in a foreign country. But even though you never came to us, we were working for you. This evening, I will explain some of the things U.S. Embassy personnel, from ambassadors through all of their staffs, to earn their keep and to fulfill the oath that all of us take to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So what do you get for your tax dollars, although it's a relatively small, very small portion of your tax dollars from the 277 U.S. diplomatic posts overseas? What do ambassadors and others at U.S. embassies do for your benefit? The priorities each embassy sets for their work during the year comes from a formal strategy that it devises along with Washington, as well as a detailed plan to achieve its goals. And some of you may know that ambassadors are representatives of the president. They are nominated by the president. They have to be confirmed by the Senate. And they go out with a letter of instruction from the president to that ambassador about the priorities that the president would like to see pursued. But of course, those realities change over time, and we have to adjust our priorities and the resources we devote to them. I literally wrote out a couple of pages, 3 pages of goals before I went off to Kuwait, for example, put them in the top drawer of my office in Kuwait, and looked at them every few weeks to see how we were doing. I got through about half of the goals, which was not too bad, actually. That's not too bad. And some I had to cross off as impossible, not doable, and some we had to change, of course. So embassies are engaged in the high issues of foreign policy, the biggest strategic issues that the United States faces: de-escalation and resolution of armed conflicts, nuclear and other weapons proliferation, terrorism, and then some of the smallest: visas, promoting education in the United States, facilitating connections among health practitioners in the United States and overseas, artists and others. Perhaps the most important classic diplomacy task of U.S. embassies is to help build international coalitions, to go to war, to impose sanctions, and in the Q&A, if you want to talk about whether sanctions work or not, it's a popular question, happy to do that. The answer is sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. To enforcing embargoes, to securing UN Security Council resolutions and other support to resolve regional conflicts. Jim mentioned I was initially in my career involved in something that led to the independence of Namibia and the withdrawal of 35,000 Cuban troops. And that was all endorsed by the UN, which then conducted elections, which gave birth to an independent country. I helped work on a seminal resolution on Syria, for example, which unfortunately has not been implemented, which would call for a political settlement of that civil war. Some of you may follow some events in the ongoing conflict in Yemen. That's another area where a good friend of mine, Tim Lenderking, is literally, I think, now just landed in the region, in the Gulf region, to try to forward a settlement of that very deadly and from a humanitarian perspective, disastrous conflict. We help prevent proliferation. We create pressure on offending countries to halt aggression or back off on human rights violations. How do we do that? We go in and we give, as we call it, a démarche. We try to influence what we call the host country government, wherever we're stationed, and we do it all in conjunction with each other. Sometimes we enlist other countries to go with us because we can have more leverage if we do it as a group rather than just the United States. So we're the ones in the embassies working behind the scenes to gather potential allies, even as top Washington policymakers make their pitches. Opposition, obviously, to any Russian aggression against Ukraine right now is an example. The diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics is another. And one of the most effective examples in all of diplomatic history of building a coalition and getting something done was actually the liberation of Kuwait from the forces of Saddam Hussein 30 years ago. And obviously I wasn't in Kuwait then, but the living effects of that are there now. I recently about 2 months ago, I had the opportunity to discuss that great coalition building effort with the Russians, the United States side by side with the Russians in that case, and others. The main architect of that enterprise from the American perspective, with the support, of course, President George H.W. Bush, was Secretary of State Jim Baker. And 2 months ago, I got to be with Secretary Baker in College Station, Texas. And we talked about that enterprise, and of which, by the way, he recollects every single detail, and gave a great expose of how he built that coalition when it wasn't at all certain that you could build such a coalition. We are salespeople out in the field there. We're salespeople of the United States to foreign audiences. We try to promote greater respect for human rights. We try to discourage authoritarianism. We try to encourage democratization. And we promote our norms and values, as well as the value of having a strong relationship, that country having a strong relationship with the United States. So the US image, the image of the US, and the perception of how we conduct ourselves in terms of the fundamentals of democracy is critical to how successful we are overseas. As a diplomat, I didn't oversell. I tried very conscientiously not to oversell, nor did I undersell. I tried to present an accurate picture of what is going on in the United States and what we would like to see happen internationally. I should say that embassies, you think embassies just exist overseas and the staff, even though we live overseas, we're also doing a little bit of selling back in Washington. We sometimes push either directly or indirectly for increased appropriations from Congress for what we consider good causes. We, in foreign assistance, we contribute to policy making. We advise all the different government agencies, state, defense, treasury, homeland security, agriculture, and the National Security Council itself. We try to make sure that Washington, from our perspective, hears all of the angles of an issue before making a decision that then we are bound to implement, including information that they might not want to hear. We work to advance U.S. interest on global issues, including ameliorating the effects of climate change, stifling the spread of pandemics. We enlist foreign cooperation to stop human trafficking, for example, and our illegal narcotics trade. That was something I was very happy and proud to have participated in an effort that brought about the first shelter for women trafficked in Kuwait, in Turkey rather. We also, of course, advocated worldwide. We advocate for the release of political prisoners. We prepare and implement programs for visiting congressional delegations and other prominent visitors, and we write briefing papers for them for their study before they come. And then we brief them at the beginning of their visits and advise them throughout their meetings as appropriate. We also, each embassy manages the day-to-day relationship between the United States and that country or organization. Some countries, the United States has what we call strategic dialogues with those countries. So what that means is often, usually with the leadership and the prodding of the U.S. Embassy in that country, we prioritize the initiatives we want to accomplish with that country. Do we want, for example, greater security? Do we need greater security cooperation? Do we need more trading of information that can lead to the foiling of terrorist events? Do we need more economic cooperation, cooperation at the United Nations or other international organizations? Do we need help in consular affairs to help our citizens in both places? And can we do more to increase people-to-people cooperation in education, health, cultural issues? Ladies and gentlemen, we are also security officers. We have security officers in the embassies, but embassies help evaluate threats. We communicate with American citizens in country. We hear their concerns back. We may be arranging their evacuation or advising them to leave. We put out travel advisories or to advise people to avoid certain areas or to avoid certain events. And then, as I said, on the bigger picture, we promote greater security cooperation, including terror, but not only just terrorism, but also increasingly so maybe cyber attacks. We help enable in those countries where it's relevant, where we have a U.S. military presence, we help enable and support the stationing of U.S. military personnel in these foreign countries. We do that by, in some cases, we negotiate something called the Status of Forces Agreement or other agreements that literally govern the conduct and help protect our members of the U.S. military in that foreign country. And it can get very practical. One day I got a phone call on a weekend in Kuwait. One of the facilities to which our U.S. soldiers had access in Kuwait lost electricity, and we needed to bring in a crew from this is Kuwait Electricity to get that fixed on obviously an immediate basis. I got on the phone with the Minister of Electricity, and the team was dispatched. Of course, the military did a heck of a lot for us too, all the time. And it was a great partnership. It was perhaps the greatest privilege of my serving in a place like Kuwait was the opportunity to serve with the great men and women of our armed forces. We are sanctions enforcers, as I said, and we might contribute to the knowledge regarding those who should be considered for sanctions. We are reporters in a fashion. That's what I was looking to do when I first joined the Foreign Service. I thought, what can I do? I can scoop Washington. I can tell Washington things it doesn't know. And in those days it was easier to do because you didn't really have the internet. You didn't have social media. It's much tougher to get the scoop now, but we can still scoop others, and we can scoop the media as well. But it's our job to make sure that, to the best of our ability, Washington understands what's going on in that country. We're also asked to be predictors, to not just to analyze, but to have a crystal ball on what will happen. in the future. And we analyze host country media and social media for Washington. And for that, we have to be out on the street or on phones or whatever, by WhatsApp, by other social media, building those contacts that we have with people in the countries in which we're operating. We need those people so that we can go back to them periodically and say, I saw this, but what does it really mean? Or what's going to happen next, so we can help Washington. I mentioned our support for international negotiations, which we can get into if you'd like in the questions and answers. For 2 of the 3 years I was in Kuwait, Kuwait held the Arab non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council. So we were constantly going to the Kuwaitis and said, you know, this, we need to prioritize this particular issue in the council. We need support for either co-sponsoring or supporting a resolution. We are also, ladies and gentlemen, aid workers because the United States is a major foreign assistance donor and should be a major foreign assistance donor. And personnel in the State Department and USAID are manage those foreign funds appropriated by Congress. And of course, we are specialists in providing services to American citizens abroad. I mentioned, hopefully, that none of you had to avail our services to visit you in a prison or in a detention facility. But besides providing health and security advisories, we do work on family reunifications. We help repatriate the destitute or the ill. And yes, we do go to prisons and monitor trials to try to make sure that Americans are treated fairly by legal systems. And I want to spend a few minutes on what I think we should do more of, which we are doing, but we should do more of. We are business promoters. We help American companies gain contracts with foreign governments or private entities. It really is true that the business of diplomacy, part of the business of diplomacy, is business. None of us should lose sight of the fact that 96% of global consumers live outside the United States. So ambassadors or principal officers of US missions overseas host something called direct line webinars and conference calls. We work very closely with the Department of Commerce, of course, to discuss we discuss and give information on emerging sectors or new developments, what could be good new business opportunities down the road. Any US business can register to participate in these webinars. We alert businesses to those opportunities, upcoming contracts overseas. In the defense trade area, of course, when it's government to government often, we inform businesses of regulations and restrictions, and we support their efforts to gain contracts. The way the U.S. Department of Commerce and of course, State Department joins them is we do not support generally one company against another company. We're supporting American companies as they compete with foreign companies, and we're mainly out there to help ensure fair treatment of U.S. companies in any contracting competition. We run business matchmaking services, again, with what the U.S. Department of Commerce's Foreign Commercial Service. We connect businesses with potential local partners that they might need to help them gain a contract or to implement a contract. We push to open closed markets for U.S. companies. That includes fair access, for example, for agricultural products. Keep in mind that the United States exports 30% of what it grows. We organize trade missions in host countries, and for host country potential investors or businesses to come to the United States. While we're doing all of this business support for businesses, we also have to ensure that we are doing enough. Are we tuned into the private sector? Are we tuned into private companies enough? And can we help them, for example, commercial dispute resolution, for example? Some countries might not have arbitration processes. So we help develop that and help create new opportunities for arbitration or mediation of commercial disputes. One area that is an increasingly important area for, I think, and something that really needs more work on our part. When I say our part, I'm talking about the U.S. government generally, protecting U.S. intellectual property rights abroad. In the Kuwait example, we wound up actually prompting entirely new legislation to help better protect intellectual property. And our efforts and the efforts of our colleagues also have helped, and including Washington, have helped create kind of a 24-hour info sharing mechanism to expose violations of intellectual property. Businesses, ladies and gentlemen, periodically, and at least most recently, as maybe I was in 2020, approached the State Department again for more support and more involvement and engagement. They sent a letter to then Secretary of State Pompeo asking for more diplomats, more activity in support of the businesses. And I agree. I belong to something called the American Academy of Diplomacy, which is a group of retired ambassadors, retired generals, and others, high-ranking officials, and we are coming up with ideas to which we are putting to the administration and Congress as well for support to enhance this, what we call commercial advocacy. One idea I had, for example, is to have a U.S. government State Department position of an envoy who would help our companies provide companies working in cybersecurity, whether they be goods or providing goods or services, to help them market themselves overseas. The United Kingdom, for example, has such a position. The United States does not, and I think it would be a valuable thing to have. So I think it's hard to argue with the view that for several years, and this is under both Democratic and Republican administrations, the government has not done enough to advocate for and support U.S. business possibilities. So hopefully that will, I think it's increasing all the time, and I think there's room for further effort. Another area, of course, related to business is to negotiate trade deals. And then when you negotiate international trade deals, that you get that the other countries in those trade deals live up to their obligations under those. So trade with China obviously is one of our most consequential trade relationships, and China is still well below its purchase commitments of U.S. products under those under the agreements that we have reached. Right now, the Biden administration, for example, is facing a decision whether to renegotiate and join what's called the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. It used to be called just the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That will involve extensive negotiations with trading partners. So part in Washington, part via our embassies overseas. We also try, while we're overseas, publicly and privately, to get governments to crack down on corruption. And even conflict of interest, which may not be, as you know, it may be a concept here, it may not be a concept in every country, where conflict of interest is a violation of either law or regulation. And we need to set standards. You know, I think some of you, or many of you, are aware that U.S. companies follow, when they're overseas, something called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Well, if other companies are not, because they're not bound by such things, then it may not be a level playing field. So advocating for greater adherence to efforts to eliminate corruption also indirectly help our businesses compete and lessen that disadvantage that they might be at, that they might experience. And I wanted to mention one subject that we get involved in that's very near and dear to my heart, which is we promote the study of foreign students here in the United States. I believe that in all my years, and if I learned one lesson from the State Department, from my State Department career, it was that the best predictor of whether a foreign official would at least understand your argument, maybe not agree with you when you're sitting across that negotiating table, whether that foreign official, as we would say, got it, kind of at least knew where we were coming from, is whether he or she studied in the United States. And I think that was the most reliable predictor. So I believe the more people that we have studying here, the better it is for us. The better it is for the universities here in the United States, for the communities in which these universities exist, and also from a foreign policy perspective. And I'll talk just a little bit about it more in a moment. We are, of course, spokespeople. That's another big part of our job, day in and day out. And we explain U.S. positions and views to local media and host countries, to their populations in ways we think it will resonate. Now, we may receive points from Washington to use. Those might be the right points to use. We may customize them because we feel, no, that's, we need to say something else or something a little bit different in order to reach a point that might sway a European audience, may fall on deaf ears in Asia or in the Middle East. With social media's ability to instantly inform millions of people, of course, embassies may have to also knock down false stories as quickly and as well as getting out factual information. So that means embassies have to be quite nimble. And of course, when you see talking points and statements from the White House or statements from the State Department or the Defense Department, those may have the input of our ambassadors and our embassies in the field. And we help with natural disasters, ladies and gentlemen. Many examples over history, from 4 years ago, the Mexican earthquake is one of the most prominent, but in the last few days, you may have heard about a tsunami in Tonga. Well, we're involved in providing assistance to that. And I will say that every day at a U.S. embassy is different. And we do some things that you might not consider foreign policy. In my very first tour, I wound up testifying and representing the State Department at an extradition hearing to get an American who had fled overseas back to the United States to be tried for fraud. Thankfully, we were successful in getting him extradited. Ladies and gentlemen, the tools of U.S. diplomacy are not only diplomatic. Of course, we try to play to our strengths, which include back here a strong democracy, openness, support for innovation. And one of the best foreign policy tools, of course, is a dynamic, highly competitive economy. We maintain our status as a technological leader and leader in innovation and entrepreneurship. And we need to keep attracting great brains from overseas and creating those brains domestically as well. And we need to continue attracting foreign investment. Diplomacy is all about leverage and being economically successful inside the United States increases our leverage outside the United States. That's often what gives us the edge at the international negotiating table. Speaking generally, ladies and gentlemen, I do believe that when the United States takes a step back, there is a big debate over how active should we be. But when the United States takes a step back internationally, other countries may indeed fill that vacuum. But I also understand that the American people may not support investments in every place at every time, even during crises. So there's always a calculation. You saw this debate, obviously, over the Afghanistan withdrawal. We can talk about that further if you'd like. But even an America First policy requires diplomacy and the human and financial resources to adequately support it. For the first time in history, ladies and gentlemen, we have fewer diplomats in the field than another country, and that country is China, particularly in the economic and the commercial spheres. So we may decide to lessen our involvement in a conflict or some conflicts or in a regional issue, but our core principles and an economy that gains so greatly from foreign markets deserves and benefits from strong U.S. engagement. And that includes being able to be there at the table when you're setting standards on cybersecurity, fair trade, non-proliferation, protection of intellectual property, you name it. And that requires sustained support for human and financial resources. And it requires, I don't want to speak too parochially here, confirmed ambassadors. So you all can encourage both the administration and the Senate and Congress to nominate and confirm foreign policy professionals. This is not a partisan issue. It is not a Democratic issue. It is not a Republican issue, and it should not be a partisan issue. Americans cannot, as the Council on Foreign Relations President Richard Haas wrote last month, want the benefits of international order without doing the hard work of building and maintaining it. And like I said, individuals can play the role. They can help by engaging on issues like foreign students studying in the United States. According to one association, in 2019-2020, the United States lost more than 42,000 jobs and $1.8 billion as students chose to study in other countries. Those studying in the United States have contributed from the most recent figures, $28.4 billion, supporting some over 300,000 jobs in the US economy. So this is not some altruistic thing. This is hard-headed American interest. And let me bring it even closer to home for you. In Georgia, over 21,000 foreign students injected $662 million into the state economy and an estimated 7,100 jobs. There were over 24,000 international students in 2020 studying in Georgia colleges and university, contributing over $800 million to the economy. And I mentioned that there's also foreign policy benefits. So 62 leaders from 58 countries studied in the United States. Let me say something else. Those who are not leaders of countries are leaders of business. They are leaders within governments. They are leaders of non-governmental institutions. They are leaders in academia. And I can tell you, I had the Secretary of State visit me while I was visit Kuwait, and while I was ambassador, we arranged a meeting with 15 Kuwaiti graduates of US universities. And to a person, it was all meant to be a small meeting that they could interact with the secretary directly. They all said it was the greatest experience of their lives that they have kept with them. And by the way, if they get used to consuming American goods and services while they're students, they might maintain that predilection when they go back to their own countries. But Georgia, given obviously the port of Savannah and otherwise, has major connections to foreign markets. There are almost $40 billion in exports in 2020, including not just agricultural, many different types of exports. So it really is not out of altruism that we should support engagement, that we should support good funding for our foreign policy professionals, that we should support international students being educated here, that we should work within our own institutions, hospitals, universities, whatever, to create connections overseas. So just as you benefit from the work of US foreign affairs professionals overseas, which I've tried to outline this evening, you can contribute directly to the success of US engagement internationally. It may be, our foreign policy may be conducted by high-level officials, but the US national interest is served by the smaller actions that you all can take abroad individually or through your associations with institutions. And I also want to say one last word, which is to encourage those whom you mentor to at least consider a career in international affairs, whether it be with the government, in international business, international organizations. Thank you very much for your attention this evening, and I look forward to your questions. Jim?
So thank you so much, Ambassador Silverman. And now it's time for our members to ask questions. So let me start this by saying, when you ask questions about this great presentation we've just had, please do it through the chat function on your laptop or your iPad, and not a hand wave. A hand wave won't get a response. And because of the way that we're set up here, I am going to be in one corner of the room with a microphone, and the ambassador is going to be back here at the podium, and we're going to try and pick up all of the questions that come in. So let me move away. But first, I'd like to ask. You made a comment about the embassies being sanctions enforcers. And that was it. Can you touch on that a little bit more? Thank you.
Sure. You know, it obviously varies from situation to situation, but once the United States imposes sanctions on a country, of course, we're telling other countries, do not do business with them, or we're sanctioning an entity almost every day. I'm on the State Department mailing list. You can get on it too, by the way. And if you don't mind being bothered, they will tell you every single time that they sanction an individual or organization, because it all has to be there's a very elaborate process in the United States under which we sanction people. They say, you probably heard, their assets were frozen, for example, in the United States. Okay. It also means that they cannot do business with the United States. And if an American citizen does business with them, that's a problem. If a foreigner does business with someone under sanctions, then maybe they can't do business with the United States. So we are the ones that go to, and usually this is done at a very high level at the government. You may go to the prime minister, the foreign minister, a trade minister, or something. And we're giving them the information on who are these sanctioned institutions or individuals, and we put them on notice, and we say, please circulate throughout the government, circulate throughout the private business community, that if you do, that these people are now under, or organizations are now under sanctions by the United States and maybe others. And by the way, I said, I mentioned during my talk, we can talk about whether sanctions work or not. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes when they work, they don't work right away. They may work years down the road in a vaguer sense. But there is some value in them. And but it's only if we get other countries to go along with us. If we're out there alone, always doing sanctions, it's much more difficult. And now you see exactly the kind of diplomatic operation that goes on in the case of Russia's potential aggression against Ukraine, where we're threatening sanctions, but we need others to do that with us, and that's why you see Secretary of State Blinken in these countries literally as we speak, and when he's not in these countries in Europe and elsewhere, on the phone with them regarding the implementation of potential sanctions.
Thank you. And the next question we have is, does our singular focus on security or the transformation of our embassies into fortresses impact our ability to promote U.S. interests?
So thank you for the question. It's a very important question. I got to my first post not long after 9/11. My first foreign, not my first foreign, early in my career, let me put it that way. That was one of those posts which were being hardened or were being built architecturally to, to hopefully not to either deter action, of course, or to protect the people inside should there be an attack on that embassy. And we've gone, and then you remember the very tragic incident, for example, of a friend of mine, Ambassador Chris Stevens in Libya, who was killed. So we have run the gamut, or run the cycle of having to contract, to protect our people. And obviously we want to secure our people. But now we've almost come in some ways in the discussion to a full circle where we know we have to have people out there. So you do the best you can security-wise, to enhance personal security, but everybody knows that they have to be out there, and you find that you're careful, you're prudent, but you're getting out there and doing your job, and everybody knows that. And I think that's what guides all of us now in the Foreign Service and those overseas. Period. You have force protection in the military, but they do their job, obviously, but they're very fastidious about observing force protection.
And so I think a good follow-on question we have from another member is, how do we share, given the environment that you just talked about, how do we share U.S. culture through our embassies?
Yeah. So we're out there. We have offices every embassy has a public affairs section. That includes people who work on information, meaning dealing with the media, and also part of it is cultural. So we're bringing groups out all the time. They may be, a jazz band to come and play, university exchanges, artists, poets, you name it. And then also helping facilitate foreign groups coming to the United States. So that goes on literally every single day to the extent that it can, and there are opportunities with that particular country. We do it all the time. It's a central part of any mission. In every single U.S. embassy, there is something called the country team, which is made up of all the different sections of the embassy, led by the ambassador and the deputy chief of mission, deputy ambassador. And what we used to do, what I particularly like to do is to have them every 6 months come up with goals for their particular sections. And that included, for example, with cultural programming, you usually have to program it 6 months or maybe several months out. Things have to be arranged for in the middle of, let's say, a prominent musical group is doing a regional tour. So you've got to plug into that months in advance because of the organization that's required. And we get enormous benefits out of those cultural programs, and they show some of the best parts of the United States. They are really, and for those people, I talked to you about all those great people overseas who studied here in the United States. They love it when the Americans come back to their country and perform or do that. They're your most enthusiastic audience, and it really spreads things back there. So it's really a central part of every U.S. embassy's activities.
And you might repeat the questions because I understand
I'm
not
sorry.
coming through.
Okay, sorry.
But
yeah.
Do we still have libraries overseas?
We do I think in some places we may still have them, but not what we used to have. I was asked, are there libraries in U.S. embassies? Because it used to be libraries, and then we have the American corners that we used to have, and it's not to the same degree. That is a consequence of security. So that is an unfortunate part of it. But what that means is we go on the road maybe and do it. In other words, we're pushing things out of the embassy. In other words, if you can't have people come in, then that means you have to redouble your efforts to go out, and that's what we do. And let me just say one other thing, because I mentioned students studying here. We participate and organize educational fairs. So universities, U.S. universities and colleges and even community colleges go on the road to attract foreign students. And we host those events in each of the, in the countries that we're in to promote. And it's like a school fair like any others, or a job fair. You literally go from desk to desk. Foreign students come in and they get to meet with representatives of all these different universities, plug into them, get more information.
Great segue into the next question. And that is, it's reported that there is a decline in applications for foreign service positions.
Yeah.
Entry-level foreign service
that's
positions. How could we go about, or what are your thoughts about reversing that trend?
We do have to so the question was whether there's been a drop-off in the number of people applying to take the foreign service exam. And unfortunately, that has been the case, although it's now starting to go back up a little bit. And that's one of the things that I do, other ex-ambassadors do, and other diplomats. We have, by the way, Foreign Service has some positions for active Foreign Service officers who are called diplomats in residence, where they're at universities and they're promoting, they're encouraging students to take the Foreign Service exam. I've done it here, by the way. Jose invited me and I spoke to his class about that. I'll be doing it, I think next in March, I'll be doing it elsewhere in Georgia, probably up at Georgia Tech. So you just have to get out there and spread the word. There's much more information about taking the Foreign Service exam. So you can go on the state.gov website, go to the Foreign Service exam. It's all very easy, and the process would be explained to you. But we do have to, it's a great career, but I don't say join the Foreign Service. I say consider joining the Foreign Service or go into the international business. Obviously might go into the military, go work for international institutions, but you get yourself overseas. And I'm so pleased with something that the council is doing about helping scholarships for kids studying abroad. I say to all the students, take any advantage you can to get overseas while you're a student still. Or if not, maybe after you complete your education, because there's no substitute for actually living in a place. But we're, like I said, a lot of us in the Foreign Service, current or previous and otherwise, are ambassadors for considering the Foreign Service, as getting people to consider the Foreign Service for the career. And I think it has been coming up of late. And also, I would say, to get as diverse a group of students, potential future Foreign Service officers.
Thank you. And what I'll claim is the last question, and that from one of our members, given the current state of affairs, how do you think, what's going on in the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine these days?
I'm not in the embassy right now, by the way. I should say that I think it was earlier today or late yesterday that Secretary of State Blinken promised that there would be a nominee for ambassador to Ukraine very soon. So it has what we call a chargé d'affaires. The deputy chief of mission is running the embassy there. She's a great U.S. diplomat, somebody with whom I used to work. So, I don't know because I'm not talking to them daily, but I can tell you, I think from my experience, that on the one hand, obviously it's a high pressure situation. On the other hand, this is what you signed on for, to be in the eye, hopefully of not too big a storm, but to be in the eye of the action, to be in a place where the headlines are there, every single day or now throughout the day, is a great privilege. And that means that, I think probably every officer in that embassy is saying, what I was doing before was important. It's a lot more important now, meaning I got to get it right, or I got to get more. I got to do this better. Washington needs even better information from me. We need to push even further. And, so in any of our embassies, but not just in Kyiv, in Ukraine, you're talking about our embassy in Moscow has obviously a very tough job. And our embassies throughout all of these countries, in which all of the NATO countries, for example, with whom we've enlisted, their support and unity of action. So there's a whole slew of U.S. posts who have over the last period had to raise their game in order to help deal with this crisis.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.
So thank you, Ambassador Silverman, for just excellent presentation and answers to questions. It'll provoke a lot of discussion among members, and we're very appreciative for you to have done this. This concludes our program then, but with two comments. Again, thank you, Ambassador Silverman, for an excellent presentation. We're grateful for your helping us understand what U.S. embassies do for America. We wish you success, you and Vicki, and happiness in your new life here in Savannah. And we look forward to meeting you in person at future programs. And we're going to have to make sure that when that happens, we get you to stand up. Folks might have seen you on the little screen here, but we'd certainly like them to meet you in person. To our members, looking ahead, our next program will be February 17th with Daniel Shields on the diplomatic instrument of power in 2022. Sounds like it might be related, but different presenter and a different thought. So until then, thank you to our members for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to Ambassador Lawrence Silverman for an excellent and enlightening presentation on what U.S. embassies do for America. And with that, and there's Ambassador Shields on the screen. With that, I wish you all a good luck. See you February 17th. Thank you and good night.